Thank you again for joining this session. This session is focused on IPR and the EHDS. So we are taking a deep dive into this very sensitive and maybe also a bit conflicting subject for some parties who can see this. But it will be the discussion. We hope that it will take place in a very constructive manner. We are hoping to move forward in this subject matter, even we know that this is only the start of discussion. So my name is Elina Drakvik, and I'm working as senior lead at Sitra, the Finnish Innovation Fund. My job is there to promote the secondary use of health data, and Sitra is also the coordinator of EHDS 2 joint action. So in this panel, we have Guillaume, who is Legislative and Policy Officer from the European Commission and DG SANTE. We also have Aneta, Tyszkiewicz, Director, Digital and Data from the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industries and Associations. And we have Katrine Højen, who is Head of Section from the Danish Health Data Authority. And we have Michel Silvestry, Head of Unit, the Swedish eHealth Agency. But we are now ready to start. So we start with Guillaume, who is a Legislative Officer at DG SANTE, and he is a lawyer specialized in data protection and biomedical law. And prior to joining DG SANTE, Guillaume worked at the Office of the European Data Protection Supervisor and at the National Data Protection Authority of Luxembourg. And Guillaume is joining online. So Guillaume, the floor is yours for the opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Elina, and I'm really happy to be there to join you to actually talk about this very interesting and challenging topics of IP right in the HDS. So it is indeed just a starting point of the discussion. I'm sure there will be a lot of interesting elements to raise there. But here, really, I will really want to set the ground floor about what the intended vision with the HDS regulation on this topic, and really it's boiled down to two key principles. The first one being that IP right and assimilated right should not be an obstacle for the reuse of electronic health data for secondary use. Really, it should not be like, the data holder should just not be able to say, yes, there's IP right or trade secret and things like that. And no, you can't have access to this data. So that's the first principle. But before everybody starts crying and everything, the big element there is to say the HDS is not there, and definitely not there, to circumvent this IP right and trade secret. So we do not either want people to say, oh, now I can actually have access to right, I should not have access to the HDS. This is not what the design of the HDS is about. Really, what it's really about is that data holder, I mean, if I can take an illustrative purpose, that they can say, these are fragile data. I mean, they have some additional right attached to them, and we should handle them with care. And really, the key element there is, okay, these data are there, potentially could be useful, but we need to find a way to make it work between the legitimate interest of the data holder to protect his right or her right, and the legitimate interest of the data user to have access to these interesting data set and to be able to use them to actually for the benefit of society at large. So there, it's really the key founding element of the EHDS regulation, and really there's not much more to it in there for the principle. The second additional element, and that was there, is who actually make the decision about providing access or not to this type of data protected by IP right and assimilated. And there it will be the responsibility of the HDAB, the Health Data Access Body, to actually call the shot on this element and to decide by themselves, provided with the information given by the data holder, by the data user, trying to find suitable solution to make it work and to decide themselves whether it's possible or not. And let's be clear, I mean, in some cases, it might not be possible to have access to these to the data type, and there the health data access body would have provided actually they give a reason and to the data user would be entitled to say sorry to the data applicant, we cannot provide you access to this data because there's no way for us to actually reconcile these protection of these rights with what your legitimate interest in actually having access to this data. So the EHDS does not actually oblige the data holder to provide access to this thing, but it's really about try to make it work and really trying to find a way to handle this fragile type of data, this specific type of data with care and try while maintaining their protected status. One additional thing I would like to point out is during the negotiation, one of the main change that was being added is that for clinical trial data, we are following the rule already provided by the clinical trial regulation and by EMA regulation. So the protection of clinical trial data is not affected in any way and will continue to apply in relationship to this right. I think there's not much more there on really the general principle. I mean, people would believe that why there's not much more than that, but the reason is also there is quite simple. IP right and assimilated have a lot of different way of working, a lot of different possibilities and exceptions. So it would be very difficult to actually put all these possibilities and exceptions in within the regulation. What really is in the regulation is the basic working principle, and then it will be again for the different stakeholder within this EHDS framework to work together to make it work and to ensure that these data type, protected data type, can be made accessible while maintaining and protecting the protection provided by these different rights and regulation. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Guillaume, for this laying out the basic principles and how it is foreseen in the EHDS. Are there any immediate questions or clarifying questions, comments to Guillaume at this point? One or two questions we have a chance to take if there are from the audience. Yes? Can we have a mic here?
Can you elaborate a bit further on the clinical trial regulations linkage with the health database space regulation? So can the new regulation override clinical trial regulation at some point?
No, it would not override. I mean, basically, it will have to work alongside this clinical trial regulation. And that's really, and we do make a mention, direct mention in the regulation about the, I think it's Article 1411 of the regulation of 2004 regulation. So there's a direct reference to this thing. So we'd work along these requirements and the protection offered by these regulation.
Great.
So it doesn't change. It doesn't actually affect that. It's only affect after this. We have to take that into consideration. Basically, it doesn't actually override any of these protection.
Good. Thank you very much for the question and also the clarifying answer. We move on with the presentation. Next speaker, we have Aneta Tyszkiewicz, who is the Director, Data and Digital at FPA, and who is also representing the R&D-based pharmaceutical industry in Europe. So Aneta leads FPA's policy and advocacy activities in relation to data and real-world evidence and new technologies. And her main goal is to support the digital transformation of European healthcare systems and also bring concrete benefits to the patients. Aneta, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Elina. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for having me here. I have to say that I very much enjoy already the first session of today. I have some reflections, although I will stick to the main focus of my presentation. So if I maybe can have my slides. So as Elina mentioned, I represent the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industries and Associations, and we represent in total over 2,000 companies. Among our members, we have national associations, leading pharmaceutical companies, and also increased number of the small and medium enterprises. So as a research-based industry, our vision of digital health is to support the digital transformation of the healthcare system, to harness health data to deliver tangible and meaningful benefits to the patients. As for the research-based industry, the data is critical to all what we do, from identifying trends to testing hypotheses, to eventually develop new treatment and monitor its performance in real life. It is all very much dependent on the availability of data. However, there is an increased recognition of the certain limitations coming from the data generated in a strictly controlled environment in clinical trials. Hence, we are looking to complement the information gathered in clinical trials by so-called real-world data, and we do not hold this data at scale. As it was mentioned already today, it can take years to ensure privacy, to develop privacy compliant solution to access that data, and also it's only access based on the appropriate fee from the data user. However, from this perspective, and what Guillaume has mentioned, we very much congratulate the Commission for the finalization of the work of the European health data space. This is really a framework that is about to set common rules, standards, and governance framework in order to provide a consistent framework for accessing data for secondary use. We see it truly as a sort of a central component of the innovation-friendly ecosystem. Although it sets a very ambitious vision, and we all need to start preparing for its implementation. And from the perspective of the pharmaceutical industry, and here I focus, I don't know to what extent you're acquainted with the text of the European Health Data Space, so I will try to shed some light for those of you that might be less acquainted with exactly what this regulation is about to establish. Nonetheless, I focus only on secondary use of data. I will not comment on the setup of the primary use of data. And in these parameters, the pharmaceutical industry would have two roles. We would be a data holder and a user. A lot has been said about the pharmaceutical industries benefiting from data from European citizens and then not returning a value to the society, although in this setup we are a data holder and we are currently sharing extensive data and measuring the impact it has on the public health. So in the future system, we also will be a data holder, meaning that as long as it's a legitimate request submitted to the Health Data Access Body, we are obliged to share our data, not only clinical trials data, but I will speak about that a bit more in a minute. And as a data user, indeed, we see a great potential in the European health data space. It can provide us with these facilitated pathways to access the data across countries. It can establish this one-stop shop in order to facilitate the pathway that it's currently, as you know, it's rather very complex system with many regulatory and legal obstacles limiting our access to the data. However, there are some fundamental provisions in this adopted final text. The final text, it sets this provision at the rather high level, which means that those that would need to comply with these rules do not have instructions on how they need to start changing their internal processes in order to comply with these rules. And here this is just a sort of an essence a bit of what we've seen as essential aspects to be clarified as soon as possible. And then I will talk more about the main topic of my presentation, namely IP related provisions. So first and foremost, there is no provision related to territorial scope of the European health data space, meaning that whether the sponsor established outside of the EU are in scope, are the sponsor established in the EU processing the data of non-European citizens are also in scope, we don't know that. In GDPR, for example, this is clearly established. This might cause a number of legal and operational issues for sponsors, for data holders. Secondly, data in scope. The data categories, there are 15 categories of data data that needs to be shared under the frame of the EHDS, they are extremely broadly defined. Hence, every data holder can define them in the way that they understood what should be shared. So as I already mentioned, we hold the clinical trials data, and there is a reference to the clinical trials data in the EHDS, but it does not clarify whether it's fully completed data, whether it also includes raw data, and also the companies hold so-called non-exploratory, non-clinical data. So this is the moment when the companies are sort of investigating where is the unmet medical need, where is the actual problem, which question needs to be answered. This happens via the questionnaires, via the surveys. The companies then are also establishing their own data sets like genetic data, genomic data as well. And this data is currently not being shared. It's not patentable, but it reveals the information about the long-term investment plans of the company. It's not clarified whether this data falls under the scope of the HDS. The way how we interpret it, everything falls under the scope of the HDS. So it would be an extreme burden on the data holders if we don't have this clarity at the early stage. The second aspect, and is related more to the trust in data sharing and whether a bit linked maybe to the monetization of whether somehow the citizens should be rewarded if they are sharing their data. It's clearly proved after the adoption of the HDS that we have not succeeded in building the culture of data sharing, and we have not created the system that merits the trust of citizens in terms of data sharing, because we ended up with an opt-out, meaning that the patient can opt out from their data to be shared for secondary purposes, even if it's key-coded and anonymized data. So, and here this is the problem that EHDS is about to ensure the availability of diverse representative data, and if we have the high percentage of people opting out, this diminishes data diversity and goes against this fundamental objective of this legislation. We think that the user should be informed about the percentage of opt-out of different databases so they know the value of the data they are about to access. And from our perspective, again, we are also a holder, how we can offer an opt-out on the anonymized key-coded data if it happens retrospectively. So if it happens at the moment where the data was collected, it is feasible in principle. However, when the patient decides 2 years after, for example, the completion of trial to opt out, this is the burden not on us, it's a burden on sites, on the healthcare systems. So that's something that needs to be really well thought through to make sure that this is not really unworkable for all of the participating in the system. So these are, in our opinion, aspects that kind of like urgent. They need to be addressed now because the companies are already adapting their internal process to comply with this legislation. But now moving to the terms of sharing intellectual property protected data. And this is a bit more sort of a broadened issue here, because we are so-called IP-intensive industry, which means that we profit or benefit from certain exclusivities, which are about to give us certain sort of advantage because of all of the efforts, investments, creativity that was put into the development of new medicines. So clinical research, clinical development, it's very much educated guesswork at the beginning. So there is a high cost, it's a very lengthy process, and it's characterized by the high rates of failure. It's on average takes 12-15 years to develop a drug. Hence, the data and the insights, not even the data, but the insights that we generate from that data is actually protected under, it's included in the intellectual property protection, including trade secrets and also regulatory data protection. It's a key component of European intellectual property framework. It's also recognized under TRIPS agreement administered by the World Trade Organization, when it's explicitly said that the entity lawfully holding information that can put them in a disadvantageous situation with the competitor has a right to protect that information. The legislation which says now that the data holder cannot really, well, it is to some extent involved in the decision where such data is being shared, but the final decision is taken by the Health Data Access Body. It puts EHDS at odds with the existing IP frameworks. So now, again, I wanted to mention that there are various also forms of data generated, not only the data that is clearly patentable, and also only thanks to this existence of these very clear and explicit rules, this data is being currently shared. We have to share this data via obviously aggregated data on the EMA website. We share this data voluntarily, and also we regularly track what sort of impact it makes on the public health, as well as data is shared in the public-private partnership. So in the precognitive space, again, again, it takes quite a long time to develop agreements. That's why maybe some certain level of standardization would be welcome, but this data is being currently shared, and we should build on these existing well-functioning practices. And last but not least, once there are any sort of concerns about the data user research plans or the actual legibility of the data request, the sharing should be suspended, because once the data is out, the loss of the protection is irreversible. So this is just to give a bit of a sort of a background of what IP actually means for the industry. And now very like sort of more zooming in on what it means in the European health data space and listing specific provisions in the European health data space. So as I already mentioned, in our opinion, the data holder has a legitimate right to be involved in any decisions related to the data containing intellectual property, commercially sensitive information. Because only also the data holder has a sufficient knowledge in understanding what constitutes this commercially sensitive information in his databases. Also, it's in terms of the capacity of the system. The health data access bodies obviously over time would build sufficient capacity. Nonetheless, at the beginning, they would need some sort of expertise from the external holders in order to understand how to handle this type of data, which currently is not being shared in such form. And last but not least, there is other horizontal legislation, so-called the Data Act, and this is more in the context of consistency of all of the recently adopted legislation, that stipulates that the data holder has a right to refuse access to data when that can cause serious economic damage. And the EHDS is again inconsistent with that specific legislation. Then from our opinion, it's very important also to set the clear rules that would allow for the refusal to issue data permit, and some of them you can see on that slide. So obviously if they can create a serious economic damage, if there is no contractual agreement, if the data has been already shared. So we are holding a sensitive data, hence there is a really well-established body governing the data, the disclosure of that data, meaning that this data is already being disclosed via different routes, and it's, we have to make sure that there are now 2 or 3 different routes where the same data can be accessed. And last but not least, also from that, in that bucket, we not always the owner of the data. So we might actually have a contractual obligation from sharing the data with external partners, or in such a broad kind of scheme as it's envisaged in the European health data space. A contractual agreement is very important, and for the moment in the EHDS, this is sort of it might happen, but it's not obligatory. In our opinion, this is really the way how the commercially sensitive information has been shared for decades, and is the base sort of practice to be followed. And we even develop sort of a template of different aspects, criteria to be taken into consideration. And also the data holder should have a right to seek any compensation. This is again also not in the legislation currently for any breach of terms of this agreement. Also, as per EHDS, the non-personal data can be downloaded. Personal data cannot be downloaded. This is also the system of the federated data network, so data stays where it is, but the non-personal data can be downloaded. In our opinion, the same should apply to the IP-protected data, because once this data is being shared outside of the secure processing environment, it can be unconsented, untraceable use, and also subject of the data breach. And last but not least, but very important, publication obligations. So currently the legislation, the regulation states that the data user is obliged to publish the results of the data that was obtained within the EHDS after 18 months. But it's after 18 months of obtaining the data permit, that's extremely short time, or after obtaining the permit, which can last for 5 years, and then plus 18 months. So this is not clear. It really has to be established, including also some measures ensuring the protection of any commercially sensitive information where the data is being published and available for the society. And last but not least, there are no redefined cases where the research is directed towards innovation, meaning that when the researcher has invented certain sort of aspect that he wants to protect and wants to submit a patent, the patent submission, from the moment of patent submission to its publication, it only takes 18 months. Hence, we should make sure that the researchers that would want to patent their insights generated thanks to the data have sufficient time to ensure to submit the patent and make sure that this patent is published. So these are just some of the kind of very fundamental aspects, in our opinion, that needs to be addressed. Although we very much definitely welcome the improvement that has been achieved since the publication of the proposal, before the negotiations, obviously, and after the negotiations, when we have entire article elaborating on aspects related to IP. Nonetheless, we still think in order to streamline sort of the processes with the current practices, it's important to consider all of the issues listed on that slide. And last but not least, this is really, we really believe in that proposal in the sense of its ability to increase sort of Europe's attractiveness for investments in further research, to make Europe more competitive. And as stated in Enrico Letta report, which is now looking at the certain areas that needs to be urgently addressed in order to make sure that Europe is more competitive at the global level. In context of EHDS, he specifically mentioned that the definition and design of contractual agreement between data users and data holders before sharing the data needs to be established. So we are definitely sort of ready to collaborate with all of the relevant stakeholders, the Commission, in making the complex secondary legislation right. We don't have really an option here. We cannot make the legislation fail. Hence, knowing that we have the wealth of experience of working with data for decades, we are very interested in being part of that process. And also, we hope that the Commission would make the most of the stakeholder forum to make it truly the body where all stakeholders are present and have sufficient time to provide input, which is sometimes also an issue, especially for an association when you need to collect feedback from 2,000 members. So that would be really very much welcome that this is something, more information about the functioning of that forum are shared at the early stage. And I think I would end it here and would elaborate further during the Q&A session. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you very much for these insightful presentations. Do we have any immediate comments or questions for Aneta at this point? We have time for 1 or 2 questions if there are any clarifying questions, or it's all clear? Well, that as well. Well, maybe I have a question to you regarding the scope that you mentioned, the data in scope that still remains sort of unclear, and the different 15 categories of health data. So how do you suggest going forward with that? What could be sort of concrete actions to make it more clear?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because this is the aspect that is not to be addressed in the secondary legislation. So I think we really need to raise that topic with the EHDS board. So this is the body that is established to foster harmonized implementation of the European health data space, would be composed of the, chaired by the Commission, composed of the member states, and stakeholder forum would advise the EHDS board on certain aspects. And this needs to definitely be discussed with actual holders to understand what data they even have. And it's also the fact that they would be obliged to inform actual the health data access bodies to create the metadata catalog. So these characteristics of what sort of type of data shall be shared are definitely very urgent, and that is indeed for the moment causing a confusion. As I've mentioned, even the companies, it's not that only they have a clinical trials data. Within the parameters, outside of the parameters of clinical trials, there are also other categories. So we need to really understand which format, it's aggregated data, it's a raw data. So all of these questions needs to be answered. Yeah.
Good, thank you very much. We look forward to further discussion then in the panel, but before we go to that, we will also hear from the Health Data Access Body perspective. So we have Katrine Højen, who is head of section at the Danish Health Data Authority, and she is responsible for the different projects related to the European health data space and the use of health data for secondary purposes. She has a master's degree in European Studies from Aarhus University, and prior to working at the Danish Health Data Authority, Katrine has worked at the European Movement Denmark, where she was also in charge of all external partners and developing EU political strategies. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Great. First of all, thank you for having me here today. I'm very excited about this. My name is Katrine, and I work at the Danish Health Data Authority. As Elina mentioned, I'm here as a representative of being a health data access body. But before I go into detail with my presentation, I'd just like a short disclaimer that we are actually not appointed the Danish health data access body at the moment. It's not to say that we won't be eventually, but at the moment it's still a political decision that hasn't been made. So therefore, what I'm about to say today, both now and in the panel discussion, will be a bit of a speculations and what we imagine some of the concerns and issues would be. But of course, we don't have any specific plans and estimations at the moment, since we haven't been appointed the health data HDAB at the moment. Yes. And I'll just briefly present what the Danish Health Data Authority is. If there are more questions and you want more details about what we are doing, you're more than welcome to also talk to me afterwards. But the Danish Health Data Authority is part of the Ministry of Health in Denmark, and there are around 300 employees at the moment. And these are some of the core tasks we are dealing with. In Denmark, we have some of the most comprehensive registers of health data in the world. We actually collect health data from all the population. So we have health data from even before you're born until you die. So we have a lot of health registers that are located at the Danish Health Data Authority. And of course, this also means that there are a lot of measures in terms of the technological solutions and the security measures that are really important that are in place, and that we have some coherence across our structures and also in Denmark in general. Our main aim is to ensure that the data is used in a way so we can enhance the health care sector in Denmark, both in terms of innovation and research, and also in terms of providing better treatments and facilities for the individual citizen. Yes, I'll just mention this part of one of the aspects we have in the Danish Health Data Authority. It's called the Secure Research Platform. And this is, if you are a researcher, this is where you will be led to if you apply for any of our health data in Denmark. In Denmark, you're only allowed to apply for health data if you are part of an authorized organization. And of course, you're only allowed to apply for data if your research project has some sort of relevance for society. And then when you get access to the data, then you get access to this closed and secure analysis environment that's not connected to the internet or anything. And you, of course, only get access to the necessary form of data that you apply for. In this environment, all data is pseudonymized. So yeah, so in that way, we also have some sort of restrictions in order in terms of what you get access to. Yes. And then what we are here to talk about today are the IP rights. And as has been mentioned a few times now, it is up to the HDAB to have this responsibility to ensure that, of course, the data is available for researchers, but also ensure that the data is not being misused. And there are some challenges related to that. And I've just listed some of the challenges here. This is not a comprehensive list. There are a lot more aspects that could be considered as some of the concerns we might have in this regard. But of course, there are the main concern as being that the European health data space has a lot of benefits, especially in terms of innovation and creating the possibility for new research and new ideas to develop in Europe. And at the same time, we have to ensure that the companies and organizations in Europe, their data and their research is not compromised. So there are some challenges related to data ownership and control, some in terms of the protection of sensitive information, the compliance with regulations and commercial exploitation. That could be seen as some of the concerns that we have at the moment, because how do we deal with this? I could also say that IP rights are not something that we are currently dealing with in the Danish Health Data Authority. So this is a really new territory for us. We haven't really had any experience with this. Of course, we have a lot of experience in ensuring that the health data in general is not being misused and have some security measures in place for ensuring that. But in terms of the IP rights, we haven't really dealt with that before. So this is definitely going to be a challenge for us. And I also think that at the moment we don't really have this clear perspective of how to do this. So yeah, I think this is some of the concerns we have in this regard. I've also listed some of the future possible solutions that could be, and again, this is not a comprehensive list. But of course, I think one of the main things that we have to do in this regard is the legal clarity and some technological security measures. And I think from our perspective, we will do some of the same things that we are currently doing in terms of securing, in ensuring that health data is not being misused, and we will have some of the same measures when we are looking at data from companies and stuff like that. But of course, then there's the element of the IP rights that we have to find a balance in a way to do this in a proper way. And I think related to that, there are some aspects in terms of awareness activities and transparency that are important also to make companies more secure in a way that that data will not be misused in this. And I think in this regard, cross-border collaboration is also really essential. And I think it's important that we have some coherence and some structures across Europe to ensure that this will be done in a way so everyone is, feels secure enough to provide the data, and that the data is also usable in a way so we can still have this innovative and competitive Europe that the EHDS is also looking at. Yes. This was actually what I have now, but if any of you have any questions, I think, there's time for,
Thank you. Very interesting. So I would just a couple of questions around. So when you say researchers, so is it allowed for companies that may want to develop a medical device, for example, based on the data? Would they be allowed to use the environment and have access to the records?
At the moment, you have to be an authorized participant. And right now, that's, for instance, universities and hospitals. So you have to be a part of that. That's not to say that eventually companies could maybe be able to do that, since they also obliged to give data when,
And maybe just a quick follow-up question. So maybe especially given that you have just pseudonymized data, what mechanisms do you have in place to monitor what is taken out of the environment?
Well, when you apply for data, and just also a disclaimer, I'm not a technical expert, so if it's in that regard, I can't really answer, but when you apply for data, you get access to the data that's relevant for your application. So you won't get access to anything that's not relevant for your specific application. So it only be in regard to what you're applying for. So in that way, you get whatever data you're applying for. So if you're applying for cancer register, then you get that part, and you will get access to that in a pseudonymized way. So I don't know if that answers.
Well, not really. I mean, for example, could you just export the data from the environment?
No.
Right?
The data is will only stay in the environment. You're not allowed to take it out.
But you're allowed to process it in the environment.
Yes.
So, yes. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe I need to. I'm just interested. So maybe I need to talk to someone else about what, because really it really matters what you can say about is the data. Are you only allowed to take out anonymized results?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. We have time still for another question as well.
Which is related, you had on a slide that one of its challenges is commercial exploitation. Could you expand on it? That why is the commercial exploitation a challenge?
Yes, I think that's one of the main issues concerning this part, that of course we have to ensure that EHDS have this innovative approach, but of course at the same time we have to ensure that companies and their whatever they are looking at is not being misused. So I think this issue is something that we have to consider when preparing for the implementation. So to ensure that the companies are not facing any problems in that regard. I think that is a concern, that their data is not going to be misused.
What are the biggest misuse cases you can foresee, or what do you think, what would be the biggest problems?
Well, for instance, in Denmark we have Novo Nordisk, so I think they have a lot of data, and I don't think they're very happy about this, because I think they would be afraid that when they put their data into our registers, then some competitive could get access to that, and then they could move forward and steal their ideas. So I would say that the worry could be that they put some legal restrictions on their data and then doesn't really get any.
Thank you.
We have time for one more question there in the back.
First of all, thank you for the nice presentation and data. I would like to know more about the data sharing practices you use for international collaborations, or rather what challenges you face there. And do you also, follow-up question, I'll just say second, and what technological challenges you face there as well?
Well, in Denmark at the moment, you're only allowed to apply for data if you collaborate with a Danish authorized participant. So you have to be a part of that system. So if you live in Spain and want to get access to some data, you have to do it in collaboration with a researcher in Denmark. And this also means that the data does not leave Denmark, and it does not leave this safe environment that we have at the moment. So you're not allowed to get the data out from our research platform.
So that means you have a very specific cloud over there? Or?
Yes,
okay.
We have a cloud solution at the moment. And I don't know the technical specifications for that, but I can find out if you are interested in it.
No worries. Thank you so much.
Excellent. So now we move forward to the second part of our session. So we continue with the panel discussion. And in the panel, we have also Michel Silvestry joining us in the panel discussion. Nice to see you online. So Michel Silvestry is a biomedical scientist by profession and holds a PhD in medicine from Karolinska Institutet. Michel has a background as university lecturer at Karolinska and director of the medical laboratory of Centre of Gotland. For a period, he was also a county council politician in the Stockholm region with a special focus on healthcare research, patient safety, data security, and privacy protection. And since 2019, Michel is head of unit at the Swedish eHealth agency. At the agency, Michel has worked extensively with the negotiations concerning the EHDS, as well as he's working with the other EU-funded research projects on secondary use and also primary use. Happy to have you as a member of the panel as well, Michel. So we start with you. As we heard from Guillaume, who provided sort of the general principles of the EHDS and the IP. But now we would like to hear, sort of as a member state representative, how the EHDS regulation aims to balance the data accessibility with the IPR. Michel.
Thank you so much, Elina, and everyone. Thank you for excellent presentations. Very good introduction to the topic, I must say. Happy to be with you, but would have loved to be inside, of course, in Tallinn. But anyway, I must say, to start with, I would say that I'm really a fan of the European health data space and the proposed regulation. And as you mentioned, Elina, of course, I may be biased since I've been part of the negotiations as one of the representatives from Sweden. And I'm very happy that EHDS combines both primary use and secondary use. Having said that, of course, I, as well as most of you, I guess, can see lots of question marks and huge challenges when it comes to implementing this regulation, and also to get all the benefits from it, which will be, I think, at least 1 or maybe 2 decades into the future. So one thing here, a major challenge, I would say, is that we have this very tricky, or if you're a pessimist, maybe you would even say that it's an impossible equation to have the highest possible accessibility when it comes to this kind of data, which can be a very sensitive character, and at the same time to keep or even strengthen privacy of the individuals whose data you're using for different purposes. And also regarding the topic for this session, strengthening hopefully also the IP rights, or at least keep them at the level of the regulation about intellectual property rights and protection. So it's a tricky, very difficult balance here, and I think that we will have to find our way forward when it comes to establishing EHDS to find some kind of optimal balance when it comes to these matters. But I also think that it will take lots of both dialogue of different kinds, and I saw that Aneta emphasized the stakeholder forum, for instance, and of course we could see here maybe the need for specific stakeholder fora when it comes to these issues regarding intellectual property rights, and specifically then with representatives of different kinds of industry involved. So again, with this as a background, so to say, I think that it's been mentioned many of the different, what would you say, initiatives or angles to really have this IP protection. And we mentioned, for instance, the role of the Health Data Access Body when it comes to receiving these applications for getting access to health data, and the process for the Health Data Access Body to review the applications and also for the decision, hopefully with the possibility to also, when they see it necessary, to have a dialogue with the data holders in this case. Also important, of course, with the information from the health data holders regarding what kinds of data sets they actually hold, and also connected to the information that they will be obliged to present in the National Dataset Catalog. And of course, in this case, companies or whatever would have to really be clear when it comes to claims regarding intellectual property rights for different data sets. But at the same time, maybe that would not necessarily be forever. So a time factor here might also be of interest. Maybe for some reasons when they have actually been successful with having a medical product, for instance, from this kind of data, then maybe sometime into the future, the IP rights would not necessarily be as strong as before. So those were just a couple of examples of aspects when it comes to this from my perspective, which I would say at this point is more of a personal character than a national point of view. And also to echo what Katrine said recently in her presentation, when it comes to my agency, the Swedish eHealth agency, also in Sweden, we have not had any decisions from the Swedish government when it comes to appointing the health data access body, for instance. So we don't know which agency or maybe agencies that will have that role in the future. Probably we will be at least the national contact point, both for primary use and for secondary use. That seems to be more or less clear at this point. I think I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you very much, Michel, and also for offering this kind of a very concrete points how things could look at from your perspective, and also for the disclaimer. It is fully understood. I don't think that anywhere there have been this kind of official nominations yet, neither in Finland, even though it is foreseen that it is likely that it will be FinData. But anyway, there are, of course, political decisions to be taken at that regard. So we move on to Guillaume. I think Michel provided already very good examples about how things could look like from concrete perspective, but how do you see this kind of also working our way and finding the solutions, and what could be the mechanisms to safeguard the rights but also share the data? So how do you see the different what could be the different processes and mechanisms to do this in a more concrete manner? Have you discussed this in a more detailed way, what this could mean?
Thank you very much, Elina. I think I will actually, follow what Michel say, and actually quite agree with what he's saying, because I think that's the way forward. Maybe adding some additional detail to it. But first of all, of course, this is also again a personal view, and just thinking loudly at the moment, because it's a very dynamic environment. There's a lot of complexity and nitty-gritty detail on all this IP rights and everything, and you can't, again, as I said at the beginning, you can't just say one example, because each of them has their own little quirk and exception and peculiarity and things like that. So I think on a very general view, and I agree with what Michel said, it's really about a dialogue. It's really dialogue between the data holder, the HDAB, and the data user to see how to make it work. And this is really the key cornerstone about it. Is now the EHDS actually does say, well, this data type should be made available, and really it's about try to make it work and try to find a common agreed solution that actually can work and can actually maintain and keep the protection of IP right. As a side note, we are not trying to strengthen these right or anything, but we're definitely not trying to weaken them either. So that's, I think, it's an important element. How it can be done? I mean, it can be done and again, it's a dynamic, and the dimension of these right is important. I mean, it can be done at the stage of the data application, at the stage of the review and the data access document being provided. It can be also, you can have a protection at the secure processing environment stage, and again also at the what kind of data out can be provided. So at the beginning, of course, just and coming back to what Michel said, which is a very valid point. For example, for patent right, I mean, of course, at some point the patent right go out. I mean, at some point the patent right expire. So if you say, if for example, a data holder say, I have patent right on this data or whatever, and then you realize that the patent right expire, like 2 years ago or 1 year ago. I mean, of course, then this claim is not founded anymore. So this element would not be there. It's also, again, it will depend also on dimension of some of these rights being provided, because if you're doing for some purpose, for example, research purpose, maybe you have more flexibility than for other purpose, and some of these rights will not kick in depending on what you want to do with this data. So these are the dimensions that will need to be taken into consideration. At the element, of course, of the data permit, there will be, for example, you can provide a data permit conditional on some additional requirement, like, you know, as was said before, they could have by Aneta, you can have, like, you know, agreement, contractual agreement, where which actually allow the sharing of data. Again, on a technical level, within the secure processing environment, you have compared, and that's also a key innovation of the HDS. We actually, it's highlighted by Katrine, is you do not actually give the data. You give access to the data, which is not the same thing. I mean, you give access to be able to process the data. So it's not like you give the data and then you hope that they don't actually abuse the data. You give access to the data, so you have some form of control about what can be done with the data and how it can be accessed. So maybe one way to be, like, you know, being able to query the data and the data remain in a black box. So there's maybe some technical possibility there to actually prevent, you know, keep the data remaining, the protection of the data. And finally, with the data being out, I mean, there also, again, there could be some protection about saying you can only have a yes and no answer, and nothing else can actually come out of this secure processing environment. So these are some of these elements. And just to finalize it, again, this complaint mechanism, there are additional protection to the data holders. So it's not like, you know, there's nothing we can do, there's nothing we can protect. It's a dialogue, there are protection, there are additional elements they can actually use to ensure that the protection of these rights keep being preserved.
Great, thank you very much, Guillaume. Very concrete examples about the different elements and the stages if we think about the sort of the user journey and where to get the access to the data. So Aneta, how does this all sound to you from the industry perspective? Are you convinced?
I think it's important that we already started with that dialogue with different stakeholders, and I really wanted to emphasize the word dialogue, right? So I think it's really important that, again, we map sort of what are the existing practices, to what extent what is in the HDS is consistent with existing framework. So that's, I think, is the first, I would say, step. So I would strongly support phased implementation in collaboration, again, with all stakeholders, because what was also mentioned, I wanted to emphasize that, is the capacity of health data access body to even handle and process this type of data. This is currently not the practice. So the time would be needed in order to develop sufficient knowledge and expertise on what are the practices that gives this actually reassurance to the data holder that this data is always somehow processed following enforceable rules, preventing from this data to be used for I don't know, unfair commercial practices or can be used by the competitor. So unless we do have that in the text, I cannot unfortunately say that all of our concerns are somehow addressed, although definitely the first step is a discussion and development of the workable solutions.
Yes, well, the text is already there. There is no changing of the text anymore. So I think we just have to live with that and work with the concrete aspects of the implementation. With the
there is still secondary legislation, right? So, I mean.
But indeed, so we move on to Katrine, how this sounds from the health data access body perspective. Do you have the capacity and resources to actually deal with this, or how do you foresee the future?
No, I very much agree that I think this is such a huge dilemma, because I don't think that you can just say it's the same mechanism completely that we use at the moment that we can just apply when it comes to IP restricted data and these aspects. of course, we can use some of the knowledge and experiences we have now, and we should do that, and we should learn from what we know now, and then use that knowledge in the further development of the implementation of EHDS. But I think there are some things that we don't even know how to deal with at the moment, and there are many concerns related to this, because it is a new territory for us, and we don't really know how to do this, and to both ensure that the data is safely stored with us and not misused, and also still enhancing the innovative and competitive approach that the EHDS also facilitates. So I think collaboration is a big step forward in this, and I think we need to have these dialogues and stakeholder forums and whatever to ensure that every partner and all the data lifecycle is involved in this process of figuring out how to do this in the best possible way. Because I don't think that we want to be or the HDAB want to be an authority that limits the access and does not really have this possibility for innovative approaches in Europe. Yeah.
Good to hear. So we are learning as we also move forward. But what kind of strategies the companies could adopt to better protect the IP, but while also complying with the EHDS regulations? Do you have any ideas for that, Aneta?
What kind of I can only say that the companies are rather diligent, and they are already analyzing all of the provisions of the legislation and mapping their internal processes. However, due to the high level of uncertainty and different possible interpretation of these provisions, there is rather for the moment a concern related to what is expected from them. So what sort of strategies the companies, again, want to be part of the process, to clearly also share what sort of roadblocks they currently see, and to discuss it with the legislator, with the key decision makers, in order to develop workable solutions. So I can say that the companies, again, we are talking about a very highly regulated sector. So any collection, processing, analysis, sharing of the data is happening in accordance with a well-established rules that are enforced in the European Union. And that's not only mentioned GDPR, it's also clinical trial regulation, it's also good clinical practices. So the companies do have practice of how to handle that type of data. It's obviously, we see a great also potential in the EHDS, as I already mentioned, because of the lack of accessibility and certain, I would say, challenges at the technical level, which will limit also the quality of the data and its interconnectedness. So I'm talking here about the real world data, right? So I mean, which holds a great potential in enhancing sort of more effective and efficient research, and eventually bringing the innovative treatments to patients faster. So we are also want to make sure that the system is truly streamlined, it's harmonized, and it delivers on its promise. So for now, we are expecting a very complex institutional framework to be established all over European Union. So we need to understand what are the roles, who does what. So I think we need to do all in parallel, and when talking to each other, what are the sort of obstacles on our way, and whether we can find the solutions together. But I can only say that the companies are very much looking into implementation. They are also looking at the horizontal legislation at the same time. So they are looking at the Digital Act and how it would impact them. They are looking at the Artificial Intelligence Act that will also somehow link it to the EHDS. So there is definitely a sort of a maze of rules now with which the companies very soon would need to comply with. And they are also very high fees in terms of they won't maybe be able to meet these requirements. Hence, I think it's really important to also understand in which scenario which rules would be applicable.
And do you see from these other regulations or legislation that there could be some lessons learned that could be also taken forward or applied in this case in the EHDS and IP issues?
I really want to emphasize, I think, readiness of the system in that context, because what we have seen with the medical devices regulation particularly, that the timelines for the implementation have to be extended because the system was not ready, and that eventually had a detrimental effect on patients, on the industry of course as well, but mainly on patients, on the healthcare professionals, and we really would want to avoid this scenario with the EHDS. Hence, starting with making a workable infrastructure and the institutional framework for the primary use, then applying the stepwise approach to start with the most, let's say, mature, curated categories of data, such as electronic health records. And then from there, starting to the other categories of how this provision would apply. So I know obviously the timelines for the EHDS, I want now maybe they are rather short looking at with what we need to comply with. So I really would want to make sure that we don't need to extend them constantly in order to make sure, because we create bottlenecks and the system cannot cope with the number of requests, or eventually there is a low participation, or we have a very high percentage of opt-outs, right? So I mean, this is really all has to go hand in hand.
Good to hear indeed. But Michel, now I would like to hear your views. How do you see this interplay of the other regulations, but also the sort of cohesion between the different member states in Europe and their readiness to deal with the issue? Do you see any kind of risks or different kind of national legislations that could create some sort of obstacles or slow down this process, or how do you see this issue?
Of course, there's a risk, and not the least from the beginning of implementing the EHDS regulation, that different member states will have different interpretations of EHDS, and also national legislation, current legislation that maybe need to be adjusted, or maybe future national legislation on top of EHDS. So again, I think that it's important that along this process of implementing EHDS, and as I mentioned, I think when you look at the timeline for application of different parts of EHDS, we're talking about something like 1 or 2 decades into the future. And I think that we really need to make use of that time to have fruitful and constructive dialogues, and also along the line, so to say, harmonize as far as possible interpretation and also hopefully national legislation when it comes to EHDS and IP rights specifically in this case. Again, I mentioned earlier that no, not in this meeting, sorry, that we're having a Nordic collaboration under something which is called the Nordic Council of Ministers, and actually we have a Nordic collaboration which has just been started when it comes to looking at what we call EHDS 2, which is the dimension of secondary use when it comes to EHDS implementation. And we will have something that we call the Nordic EHDS 2 Competence Forum, where the Nordic countries, and that is then Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Finland, Iceland, where we will try to gather and discuss the challenges of EHDS and how we interpret the text and what our plans are when it comes to establishing the health data access body, national contact points, etc. And I think that's a good initiative that maybe could be an inspiration to other parts of the European Union. And of course, we have to do that also within the Union itself, and also with the additional countries when it comes to the European economic communities, let's say. I think I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much for bringing up also the VALO project, Value from Nordic Data Project, that Sitra is also coordinating. Indeed, there are of course issues to be clarified at the national level as well, but a question to Guillaume, how do you see, at the European level there's also this trade secrets directive, and it is of course being implemented at the national level as well. For example, in Finland, it is quite strict in terms of the language, the legal language, and sort of the rights that it gives for the companies for the protection of the trade secrets. So how do you see, Guillaume, like, are there any tensions now with the EHDS and this trade secrets directive, and how this should be considered in a sort of best possible and clear manner?
Okay, thank you for this question. I mean, again, the EHDS is not there to conflict with, really to essentially conflict with all this legislation, but it's here to work along them. So the thing is, it's really about, okay, what you cannot do with these national and European legislation, what is possible and what is not, and what is being posed and asked from the data user. And basically then you have to try to find whether you can find a common ground between that actually solve these two parts of this very tricky equation, as Michel pointed out, and to see whether you can find a solution to this tricky element. Sometimes you will find workable solutions. Sometimes the workable solution, the data users say, no, I mean, I can't work under this condition, so this is not possible. And sometimes it will not be possible to find solution, and then the HDAB will legitimately be able to say, so, I mean, because we need to protect these rights and everything, and what you're asking for, it's a very clear infringement of these rights. We are not unable to provide protection that actually can satisfy both your requirement and the requirements set out in these legislation, whether it's trade secret, IP right, copyright, or other, or clinical trial data directive. What I do want to also point out, and I think that this was already pointed out, but I think it's want to make clear. I mean, there is work ongoing now to actually try to prepare ourselves to these requirements, to prepare these very huge numbers of implementing acts that will need to be done. There is work on TEDS2, there's work on a lot of pilot project, community of practice, to actually try to work out some of these solutions. And I think there it's also important to see that not the HDABs, the data user, the stakeholders, and I mean also EFPS, they will be not alone in this work. It's a common, you know, you have the EHDS board, you have the stakeholder forum, you have the steering group, you have a lot of different groups where people will work together, where people can actually say, I have this problem, but me too also have the same problem. How do you actually try to solve it? I try to solve it this way. Can we make it work? Can actually this work also in Denmark or in Finland or in Sweden? So people are not alone in this issue. That people will be able to share experience in trying to face these issues and to see what works and what doesn't work. So I think that's also very important to highlight. I mean, it's not everybody is its own little corner trying to figure out how this works. We're all in it together. What's really important there also with the HDAB, it's a common framework that work across Europe, so we can find common solutions that work across Europe. It's not just one HDAB trying to find a solution for them, but for example, for things which are common across Europe, it's all the HDAB, all the stakeholders working together to find common solution. And I think that's a very powerful message to say, to actually to find common solution together. And there, hopefully, we are more likely if we work together to actually find this common answer or not to these questions.
Thank you very much, Guillaume, for these very reassuring words. So we are not alone. Maybe, Katrine, you could also say a few words about EHDS 2 and what EHDS 2 will be working or doing in this area in the near future.
And I'll just say that I really agree with what's just been said. And also from a HDAB perspective, it is quite a big responsibility to have this task. And therefore, I think that what we are working on in EHDS 2, we will have this workshop on IP rights. And this is exactly to ensure that we are not alone in this and to combine all the knowledge and experiences from the companies, from data holders, from data users, from different perspectives to ensure that everyone gets a say in this and is a part of this journey to find out how to do this in the best possible way. So we ensure that the EHDS is also, that we can actually use the benefits of EHDS and we can have the innovative approach that we need to do in Europe while also ensuring that the companies are still in charge of their own data and their own competitiveness. I think that's a really important aspect of, for instance, EHDS 2, that we have this opportunity to include all these different stakeholders in this journey to find some good solutions, or at least, a way so we can move forward together.
And I think this is a good time now to take some questions from the audience, if we have any questions from the audience, and then we can still continue with the panel and move forward that. But if there are already now questions, we can have time to address those. Yes.
Thank you for this discussion. I have a question to Aneta. How do you see how and who could be able to assess what is trade secret in pharma industry at all? Because at least according to Estonian definition, this is quite subjective. There are no concrete borders like for patent protection and so on. So who should actually Katrine hire after a couple of years who could be able to assess it?
Yes, I mean, currently the way how it's assessed, it's the data holder that then informs the appropriate authority what sort of aspects in the database are commercially sensitive. And then it obviously falls under appropriate framework, whether this data or the other aspects that fall under overall the intellectual property protection are subject or to benefit from this protection. So this is always the data holder that has a first sort of, let's say, say about which aspects shall benefit from this intellectual property. This is because of the reason that he was from the beginning part of the establishing of the data, in the context of the data, we are talking here about the data specifically, of the database, hence he knows the best which information might be commercially sensitive. So that is how it's currently conducted. Obviously, when the data is already an insight and it has been a part of the approved product that is on the market, then it also benefits from the regulatory data protection. That is really an aspect that prevents from these insights to be copied and another competing product to enter into the market before the revenue is back to the original generator. So in context now, it's always a data holder that is the main sort of source of information about what constitutes IP protected data.
Do you see a risk that the data holder would say that almost everything is protected by trade secrets and doesn't want to give out the data access just to make even more sure that it's in a better competitive position, and then we would need somebody who is neutral to assess it?
Yes, no, any claim that is submitted from the data holder to the actual authority is obviously verified, whether that information truly can constitute commercially sensitive information. So this is the way how the sort of a free business is being conducted, that the data holder has invested the time, knowledge, and creativity into generate certain insights, and he would identify what is actually being there commercially sensitive from that perspective. But that is what is actually commercially sensitive. This is very much well regulated protected under existing frameworks. So that also, in order to benefit from that protection, also that needs to be verified. So in order here, what the EHDS is proposing, it's again, it's this intermediary, right? That health data access body, and somehow the data holder would need to even build a case of and justify why this data needs to be protected. This is definitely would act as a major disincentive in terms of conducting even research in Europe, because we are talking even here about the data that is not patentable. So, and might hold commercially sensitive information. So that's why, I mean, this is very well defined what type of data in current framework, what type of data the holder can share it, and what type of data can benefit from this protection.
Do we have other questions? Yes, here.
I have a comment, not a question, if it's allowed. I think the dialogue and the discussion that we are doing here is really relevant, and it's complicated. It's a European issue, and it must be complicated. If not, it would not be European. But the European health data space some years ago started as the future of healthcare and health research in Europe. And I think it's really important that now we talk about the IP protection in this European health data space. And this is not only for big pharma companies or companies at all a topic. This is a topic for the whole research infrastructure, for smaller companies, for public research and for private research. And this makes this topic so important. And yeah, that's why I think we have seen so much uncareful discussion about IP protection during Corona times. Remember TRIPS waiver discussion, and now it's really relevant that we have a careful discussion about the impact of IP protection in the whole European health data space. It's great to have the discussion here.
Thank you very much, Oliver. Indeed, I think it is, if we think about the role of IP in creating the new innovations, so of course it has played a huge role when we think about the technological and scientific advances, new treatments, better interventions in healthcare. But now we are talking about real kind of a paradigm shift and how to better use the data to benefit everyone, but still to be in balance and not restricting or conflicting the IP. So I think it's a new issue in a way that we really have to work out the practices. I mean, we have the principles from the HDS, but it doesn't solve the issues in practice. So what could be the next steps, Katrine, from your perspective? What should we do?
Well, I hate to repeat myself, but I think collaboration is central in this, and to ensure that every partner that is involved in this process. And of course, I think we need to have some legal restrictions in a way to both ensure that that the data is not being misused, that the data is controlled and is stored in a safely manner. But of course also the other way around, that we get the data that is allowed, because I also agree with your comment that what if the companies just say all the data is falls under IP restrictions. So we also have to have it in that aspect to ensure that that the data is actually protected by IP rights. So I think the legal aspects are quite important, and I think we need to have some coherence in that, both across the different member states and for each HDAB and for every partner in this. And then I think collaboration is essential in this part.
Indeed. We move on to public trust, because this also brings the issue of trust. And what kind of role do we see that the IP protection can play when we think about public trust and, for example, the trust on a societal level? And how is this balanced with the EHDS? I'm looking at Michel right now. Do you want to comment?
Well, briefly, maybe when we're talking about public trust, it's usually more connected to privacy issues when it comes to what is called the natural person in the EHDS regulation in this case. But of course, public trust could also be part of if you, for instance, see in media that especially some small company would get very badly treated according to EHDS when it comes to the obligations to hand out sensitive data that would be crucial for their business, so to say. And that could also, of course, have an impact on public trust, of course. But on the other hand, again, I think someone in the audience mentioned the COVID pandemic that we're in a way are still struggling with a little bit at least. And I think that made it very clear that also sometimes we need to have exceptions and derogations from specific rules protecting people or business or institutions of some kind. And in that case, with the motivation or the argument that the derogations or exceptions would be for the public good, the common good instead, as a protection, for instance, or developing a vaccine against the virus of a pandemic, for instance. So there are, of course, different aspects on this, and just to finish this part, I would say that if there would be, well, bad or sad cases when it comes to businesses having to give access to very sensitive data that they claim that they should have IP protected, and that will not be the case. Or, of course, also if natural persons would be hurt in some case when it comes to privacy or similar things in connection to EHDS. We have, according to the EHDS regulation, or will have the possibilities for lodging complaints, as you mentioned, and also even the possibilities for compensation of some kind, according to the regulation. So those are maybe some major aspects when it comes to well, hopefully strengthening public trust when it comes to sharing health data and for instance, when it comes to secondary use in this case. Thank you.
Indeed, thank you very much for these insights, Michel. We have still time for the final conclusions from the panel, so we go around. What are your key takeaways and sort of one concrete recommendation that you want to make for the audience to bring this issue forward? We start with Guillaume.
I mean, for me, I think it's really important to see that the EHDS is a framework. It's a common legal framework. Actually, it's being there to, especially for secondary use, to really lower barrier to access to the health data across Europe for a lot of different useful public common use purposes. So it's not. I mean, it is a new it's a paradigm shift, because actually the barrier is much lower compared to what we have before. And also, I want to go back to what Michel said before. I mean, there are risks to this lower access, but there are also risks not to have access to this. And the COVID crisis did show that. I always said, if we had the EHDS when we had the COVID crisis, I mean, we could have saved months in actually having access to the data, which means saving months in actually having results from this data, and which means that we could have potentially saved more life in actually getting more quickly the result and the view that we need to actually fight this epidemic. So I think that's the first key thing. How to make it work? I think it's also to adapt what's already existing to this new situation, to this new kid in the block. Basically, you have a new element there, a new possibility. How do we adapt? How do we integrate this new tool, this new framework within the current existing environment, and while preserving the protection, the privacy, and all these elements that are here and should be maintained here. And I think that's the key point for me, at least personally. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Excellent. Aneta?
Yes, thank you. So I agree with everything what Guillaume actually said. I truly believe that EHDS has the potential to have a long-term benefits for patients, for healthcare professionals, for the healthcare systems. We cannot anymore ignore the value of data because of all of the challenges we face in the healthcare systems. It's also a key component of the learning healthcare systems where you can eventually start planning interventions where they truly add value. So there is really no time anymore to lose, I would say, to take an action. And we have to start saying that, yeah, in Europe, we have an ocean of data, but a desert of analysis. So that's absolutely very much supported from our end. But on the other hand, what was mentioned also quite often today, we need a balance, right? What we do not want is that companies move away the data from Europe, which can also happen. So it's also very, very important that we give this reassurance that we co-create solutions. So I won't say anything what probably others wouldn't say, that we need to co-create it, work together with all stakeholders. But the aim is to make it future-proof, workable, and fit for purpose. Yeah.
Indeed. Well said. Katrine?
Yeah, I completely agree with what you just said. I think we have to remember all the benefits and the value of the EHDS. I think that from many partners, we look at all the possible threats that this regulation could come with, but I think overall it's a really good regulation that actually has some positive aspects that can really benefit Europe, and we need to remember that. But of course, this is a balance, especially in terms of the IP rights and protecting the companies in Europe and making sure that they do not leave Europe, because that would be So I think that's one very, very important aspect of this. And then, as we have also said a couple of times now, the collaboration and ensuring that all the stakeholders are involved in the implementation of EHDS is so important to remember that it's not just the countries or the EU that is part of this, but there's an entire ecosystem and many parties in the data lifecycle that needs to be included in this. Yes.
Indeed. So also other networks, community of practice. There's 2 workshops coming up, so stay tuned. And final words then from Michel.
Well, it seems likely that the EHDS regulation will come into force at the end of this year, and then we have some time, a number of years ahead of us for the implementation and also for start applying different parts of the regulation. And as mentioned earlier, we need to make use of that time for preparations and for optimizing the future organization of EHDS, the EHDS board and different committees and subgroups under that. Also, of course, some kind of European HDAB community for the different health data access bodies of all the member states. And within that structure also, again, have a constructive dialogue for finding solutions and also, which I think some of you mentioned, even more important, collaboration for really solving issues when it comes to, for instance, IP rights and IP protection. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank all the panelists for this very constructive and very also inspiring dialogue, that even though it has been a difficult issue, we have discussed the different aspects, not all aspects. It's just a start of the discussion, but it's really an important start for this difficult subject, that we can all start working together and learn from each other and good practices. So I thank you all panelists and also all the audience for very interesting and good questions. And thank you for being part of this session.